The Season 3 update is now live here in Motorfest, which also means the new summits are also live now as well. The first one here, guys, is going to be the Showstopper 80's Classic, bringing us a pretty interesting looking Epic Firebird Nitro. I have to say right now, I am glad that's actually going to be an Epic Nitro, and not like some weird looking uncommon like Underglow, but the next one here is going to be next week, guys, bringing us the Bang Nitro. I would also say that one's probably going to be pretty dope on some of the vehicles. We also have the Dodge Challenger in gold there. We also have 10 legend points. And now the 50,000 XP is now going to be 100,000 XP for bronze. A pretty nice change, I would say everybody was probably asking for. On top of that, though, guys, the last summit here until April is going to be the Azus, or I guess you could say the Azus, something like that. It is going to be the Stealth Edition. That thing looks pretty dang sweet. Loving the rims and the body kit. That wing looks awesome with, like, that nice front splitter. Looking forward to trying out that car, at least the base one, before going after this one. After that, in gold, though, we have the Thin Line Trail Smoke looking pretty dang dope. I would say the Thin Line Trail Smoke is going to look really nice on many of, like, the drift cars. But besides that, guys, looking at the summit right now, this one is going to be a pretty interesting one. For this week, though, we're going to have 3 Street Tier 1 events. Then also after that, we have 3 Street Tier 2. Then we also have a lovely low altitude, then 2 escapes. Now, I do want to admit something right now, guys. The escapes are most likely going to be an absolute nightmare. The reason why I do say that is, my goodness, the traffic is the most annoying thing ever. And you also have to jump off a mountain in a hypercar, so that's going to be an interesting thing in itself. I also did want to mention, by the way, I am going to be doing all 6 events in first-person mode once again. And I also decided to run some oddball vehicles in some of the events, and, instead of like some of the main meta vehicles, which is going to be fairly obvious looking at the leaderboards. I was like, you know what, let's go run some odd vehicles you would most likely never see in them. But nonetheless, though, the first skill here is going to be a low altitude. Not going to lie here, guys, I would say the low altitudes are almost going to be some of the easiest skills in the game. For example, all you actually have to do is have a score breaker set. After that, you simply jump into one of these and go, you know what, let me fly that way, let me fly this way. All you have to do is stay close to the ground and boom, 150 plus thousand points. And then for the next skill is going to be an escape. And for this one, guys, I once again decided to run the Lamborghini Countach. Now, I'm going to admit right now, guys, I could easily go back into this one and most likely do better on it. But for some odd reason, I was like, you know what? I'm going to keep my 6,600 yards because getting a perfect run on some of these might end up being a nightmare. And I would say if you are looking for like the best vehicle on this skill, you're most likely going to want to run the Bugatti Dixie. I most likely did not pronounce that correctly, but let's hope I am kind of close to it. Regardless, though, I would recommend trying out the Lamborghini Countach. That thing is insane. It also does seem to handle pretty well, and you most likely can get around the traffic with how annoying they actually are. And now for the final skill here is going to once again be another escape. Now for this one, though, it is going to be slightly different in the aspect of, well, you probably could do a few different routes on this one and get a decent yard, probably get a bit farther in certain vehicles, like probably running the Gendo Dici is probably a better option, which is the main vehicle everyone is running. I once again decided to jump into the Countach and managed to get 18th place. Of course, that is probably going to change with, like, the update coming out, well, like 3 hours ago after the game was down for like 6. But I do want to mention, though, definitely try out the Lamborghini Countach. This car is incredible. One of the most annoying things about this escape, though, is by far going to be the jumping part of it. And the reason why I do say that, though, is in order to get farther on this escape, you're going to have to pretty much do some insane jumping in a hypercar, which is probably not going to be the first rodeo for many players. I mean, back in the Crew 2, we also had to go down mountains and up them, so I would say jumping over a few of them isn't going to be too hard of a task. One of the biggest tips I can give here is to make sure you're running that nitrous in the air. That way you can actually clear the mountains and land on the road. But besides all that, guys, moving over to the main events here. Now, running these in first-person mode honestly was a pretty big challenge, and I would almost recommend trying it out because it honestly was a challenge, but it was also pretty dang fun for the most part. Now, the first one here is going to be a Street Tier 1 event. I actually decided to run the Mazda RX-7. You are probably going to notice a pretty big trend of which vehicles are going to be picked. I wonder what those two are going to be looking at this here. Don't get me wrong, guys, the Audi RS2 is going to be incredible. Funnily enough, I actually was going to run that car before I did decide to use the RX-7, but I was like, you know what though, let's go use something kind of weird and do first-person mode in it, and see how I can actually do driving this car in the event. I got around 3 minutes getting me 120,000 points, and I'm not going to lie here, guys, I am by far not going to be having the best runs ever. I could most likely go back in and, probably get better at shifting in a few places, and most likely get a bit better around certain corners, but overall I would say though, try out the Mazda RX-7. It might not be the best Street Tier 1 vehicle, but it's pretty dang decent. And now for the next event though, you will have to use a classic muscle car in the Tier 1 category. For me guys, I actually decided to run the lovely Chevrolet Chevelle SS. Is it going to be the best option here? Well, I wouldn't say it's the best one, but I'm also going to be honest, it is by far not the worst option either. If you are looking at the leaderboard, you're probably going to notice a big trend of the lovely Mustang Boss 429. That car is still going to be one of my personal favorites, but which, don't get me wrong, by the way, I absolutely love that car, but I was like, you know what, I have to jump into something different, so why not try the Chevelle SS? My goodness, I have to admit, guys, it is still going to be a pretty dang Tier 1 vehicle, especially when it comes to a classic muscle event in one of the summits. And then for the next event here, it's also going to be a Tier 1 event with the lovely Dodge Charger RT Hemi. Not going to lie here, guys, I'm not the biggest fan of this car. Not saying it's going to be a terrible one, but I would also say it's not going to be a better classic muscle car here in Motorfest. Like, if I had a choice, I would easily be picking the Chevelle or even the Boss 429. And the reason why I do say this, though, is the Boss 429 or even the Chevelle SS are going to be a better option than the RT Hemi. But in this event, you obviously have to use it, so like, well, might as well get used to this vehicle in a better way than you know how the car actually is. Now for this, though, I would recommend being a bit careful around those corners. We all do know a classic Dodge Charger probably isn't going to corner that great, and that is definitely going to live up to that because it doesn't. But one thing I would recommend trying out with the Dodge Charger though is sometimes drifting around corners you obviously will end up losing speed and like probably want to grip around that turn to be a bit faster than actually drifting. One thing I would recommend trying though, guys, the Charger does seem to drift pretty dang well. On top of that, it seems to hold its speed. And then for the next event though, you will also have to use a classic vehicle in the Street Tier 2 category. For me though, I ended up picking the lovely Ferrari F40, which I have to admit right now, like, this is probably going to be one of my favorite Street Tier 2 vehicles in the entire game. Not even kidding here, guys, I love the way this car handles. It's also going to be pretty dang quick. It might not be the best accelerating car, but it is definitely going to be decent enough to where you can't compete with the other ones. The best car is probably going to be the 911 GT. That thing is basically everywhere. But even with that car being good, though, I would still recommend trying out the Ferrari F40. That car is still going to be a great competitor. On top of that, guys, I also decided to run the Ferrari F40 on the other event as well. I was like, you know what, I could try out like the 911, but I'm really loving the way the F40 looks. Plus, being in cockpit view, it has a very like open view to it. So it's going to be a bit easier to see like around you. Like some cars honestly are difficult. Luckily, the Ferrari F40 is going to be a bit more clear when being in cockpit view, so I would definitely recommend trying out the F40. That car is by far one of my favorite Tier 2 vehicles in the game. But after that, though, guys, we have the last event here, which is going to be with the lovely Lamborghini Countach. Now, we probably all do remember this car from the Crew 2. That thing was an absolute monster back then. Is it going to be as good as it was in that game? Well, to be honest, I would probably say no. Like, yes, it's going to be a decent competitor, but I would probably say in like a Tier 2 vehicle, players would most likely pick something else, unless they had to use this vehicle in the event, like, you know, in this one, to where you have to run the Countach compared to the others, but overall though, guys, I do think a lot of players are most likely going to like this summit, and the reason for that is, yes, it is going to be a Tier 1 or even Tier 2 focused. At least it is primarily going to be on classic vehicles. I love that. The only unfortunate thing here is most likely going to be the two escapes, that I would say the biggest issue is easily the traffic.